What happens when the quietest royal finally speaks out? For years, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, played her role with serene precision, operating behind palace curtains. But beneath her calm exterior boiled a storm of frustration. When Camilla allegedly broke centuries-old protocol in front of high-ranking foreign dignitaries, Sophie's silent endurance snapped. What followed wasn't just a confrontation, it was a full-scale escalation that rocked Buckingham Palace to its core. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For most of her royal life, Sophie moved with intention rather than intrusion. She mastered the art of quiet loyalty, serving without spectacle, protecting the institution without demanding praise. While others chased visibility, she worked in shadows, believing the monarchy survived not through noise, but through order. For years, that belief kept her steady, even as the ground beneath the palace began to shift. Camilla's rising confidence, her expanding visibility, her subtle rewiring of old patterns, each change landed quietly at first, like harmless tremors no one wanted to acknowledge. But Sophie noticed. She always noticed. And with every overlooked tradition, with every subtle reordering of power, the quiet pressure inside her grew heavier. The breaking point arrived not in private, but in full international view. A high-stakes state function, steeped in centuries of formality, became the unexpected stage for what many would later call the most reckless protocol violation in modern royal memory. Seating placements altered, hierarchies disrupted, time-honored positions quietly ignored. Foreign delegates, trained in ceremonial precision, exchanged restrained but unmistakable glances. Confusion flickered through the room, like an electric current no one dared to acknowledge out loud. To most watching, it looked like a minor adjustment. To Sophie, it felt like sacrilege. What cut deepest was not the breach itself, but the indifference that followed it. Camilla moved forward as if no line had been crossed, no history displaced, no meaning unsettled. To Sophie, that moment felt like the loudest silence of her life. She felt the weight of Queen Elizabeth's legacy pressing against her conscience, the echo of decades where every step, every glance, every seat had meaning. And yet, she said nothing, not because she lacked courage, but because she understood timing. Silence, for Sophie, was not surrender, it was gathering strength. Behind her composed expression that night, something shifted. Loyalty didn't fade, but it changed form. It transformed into resolve. Tension no longer lived quietly in the corners of Sophie's mind, it moved to the center of her purpose. Each whisper she overheard afterward, each vague dismissal by palace staff, each nervous laugh among aides only sharpened the truth she could no longer ignore. Camilla's dominance was no longer subtle. It was expanding, unchecked, and increasingly untethered from the structure that once governed every royal breath. And yet, Sophie still chose restraint. She watched. She waited. She catalogued moments in silence. She let the storm inside gather momentum without releasing it. To those around her, she remained the same steady presence. But beneath that controlled exterior, something irreversible had begun. The calm was no longer peace. It was the final stillness before impact. But the breach wasn't an isolated error, and Sophie had proof it wasn't the first time. What came next would shake the foundation of the Queen Consort standing. Royal watchers noticed it. Diplomats noticed it. But when Camilla violated sacred royal precedents, insiders were left stunned that no one reacted until now. The Duchess of Edinburgh's sharp eye and photographic memory documented a subtle but damning deviation from centuries of order. And once the breach was confirmed by 2 palace aides, a domino of buried offences began to emerge. In the intricate world of royal protocol, where every seat, gesture and moment is governed by history, Camilla's move that evening sent shockwaves through the inner ranks. The standing order of precedents meticulously designed to preserve the monarchy's symbolic structure was not just overlooked. It was intentionally altered. Camilla positioned herself ahead of Sophie in a ceremonial procession, reversing an arrangement that had remained untouched since Queen Elizabeth's reign. At first glance, it might have seemed like a minor shuffle, but to those who understood the weight of tradition, it was a statement, a calculated overstep. And it didn't go unnoticed by the foreign delegation seated only steps away. Whispers circled the room, notes were passed between diplomatic aides. Questions followed after the event, quietly but persistently, pressing into the heart of the Crown's credibility. Inside the palace, unease rippled. The Lord Chamberlain, normally stoic in the face of chaos, was visibly tense. Senior aides exchanged glances, eyes narrowed not in curiosity, but in concern. And standing amidst the pageantry was Sophie, her outward expression serene, but internally the alarm bells were deafening. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She already knew. For her, this wasn't about personal insult, it was about the erosion of order. Every monarchical structure relied on consistency, and what Camilla had done wasn't carelessness. It was a challenge to that consistency, a rewriting of rules without permission, consultation, or precedent. It was, to Sophie, a public slight not only to her role but to the late Queen Elizabeth's legacy. Sophie's memory didn't fail her. She recalled how the Queen had drilled into her the significance of protocol, not for vanity, but for stability. Sophie had watched how even the most minor deviations once required weeks of deliberation and clearance. And now, before her eyes, those protocols were being dismissed in the name of modernity, of progress, or perhaps something more self-serving. As she left the function that night, she didn't just walk away from the scene, she carried it, like a spark waiting for oxygen. Camilla, when lightly questioned by a senior aide later that evening, reportedly responded with dismissive amusement. "Oh, that old order? Times change," she'd said. But for Sophie, that phrase echoed like thunder. It wasn't merely an oversight. It was a dismissal of everything the monarchy had stood on for centuries. And in that moment, the distance between the Duchess of Edinburgh and the Queen Consort widened into something far more dangerous, ideological division. It didn't take long for Sophie to confirm her suspicions. 2 palace aides, trusted veterans of the late Queen's inner staff, quietly validated her account. They'd seen the change, they'd documented it, and they shared a chilling observation. This wasn't the first time Camilla had done it, nor, if unchecked, would it be the last. Behind palace gates, Sophie was gathering allies, and her next move would defy every expectation of a Windsor daughter-in-law. She held the phone, her hand trembling not from fear but from conviction. Sophie had never crossed the line before, but this time she wasn't just speaking as a royal, she was speaking as a guardian of the late Queen's legacy. That midnight call to Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, wasn't a casual concern. It was the beginning of an official complaint that would ignite a palace firestorm. For hours before she picked up the receiver, Sophie had sat in silence, torn between her role as a loyal servant of the Crown and her duty to the traditions that held the monarchy together. The memory of Queen Elizabeth's quiet strength loomed heavy over her conscience. She could still hear Her Majesty's voice from years past. Protocol is not formality, it is protection. Sophie had carried those words like scripture, especially in the wake of the Queen's death, when the institution began to shift with alarming speed. Camilla's ascendancy was swift, her influence subtle but invasive, pushing at the boundaries of order while calling it progress. Sophie had tried to understand it, even excuse it, but the breach at the state function, followed by Camilla's brazen dismissal, left no room for tolerance. The Queen's legacy was no longer being reshaped, it was being erased. And Sophie could no longer remain silent. She dialed the private number she hadn't used since the late monarch's funeral preparations. When Sir Clive answered, his voice carried both sleep and concern. Sophie's tone was calm, but there was something raw behind her words. "Clive," she said plainly, "this is not a family issue. This is a constitutional error." There was no hesitation, no small talk. She laid out the facts, what she witnessed, the pattern it confirmed, and the quiet warnings ignored by others. Sir Clive listened in unnerving silence, offering no interruption. Only when she finished did he speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll take it to him, first thing." But Sophie wasn't finished. This isn't about rivalry. This is about inheritance, not of wealth, but of order, of meaning. Clive did not argue. He simply understood. Once the call ended, Sophie sat alone in her drawing room, the room cold but her blood burning. She opened her journal, one she hadn't touched since the Queen's death. In its center page, she wrote only one line: "I have done what I must. Let the winds come." She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel regret, only resolve. What began that night was not a rebellion nor a plea. It was a reckoning, silent, poised, and sharpened by purpose. The monarchy, Sophie believed, had reached a crossroads. It could uphold the sacred weight of legacy or surrender to the vanity of modern disruption. She had made her choice, and with that, the wheels began to turn. As the complaint reached the king's private desk the next morning, the clock began ticking on a silent showdown between two royal women. When the Queen Consort learned that Sophie had made it official, her inner circle erupted. Within hours, loyalists like Fiona, Marchioness of Lansdowne, and royal advisors closed ranks to protect Camilla's dignity. But behind the polished statements and vague denials was a growing fury and a decision to strike back, not with words, but through influence. Camilla's immediate reaction wasn't disbelief, it was betrayal. "Sophie's betrayed us all," she reportedly said, pacing in the confines of Clarence House. To her, this wasn't about protocol. It was a political ambush, a power play hidden beneath the guise of tradition. But Camilla knew the rules of survival in the royal machine. She had climbed from outsider to Queen Consort, not through confrontation, but through manipulation of narrative. And now she intended to use the same weapon to dismantle Sophie's credibility before the king could act. Within hours, trusted aides and longtime sympathizers were mobilized. The goal wasn't to refute Sophie's complaint, it was to reframe it. To paint it not as a righteous act of loyalty, but as an outdated tantrum from a woman left behind by a modernizing monarchy. Behind closed doors, Camilla's camp drafted talking points, pushing a new message to whisper through friendly press corridors. The Queen Consort is ushering in a new era, one source leaked. Some members of the family struggle with change. Another suggested that Sophie had always felt overlooked, and this complaint was a desperate cry for relevance. Suddenly, tabloid columns were flooded with op-eds questioning the Duchess of Edinburgh's importance, her visibility, her motives. Old headlines were rehashed, photos recontextualized. The strategy was clear: smother the issue not with denial, but with derision. But the campaign wasn't only external. Inside the palace, subtle moves were already being made. Key courtiers were instructed to slow the transmission of Sophie's formal document to the king. Camilla's allies urged that the matter be reviewed internally first, warning of unnecessary stress on His Majesty. Sir Clive Alderton, however, refused. He had given Sophie his word, and while Camilla's influence ran deep, it hadn't yet overpowered loyalty among the old guard. Through it all, Catherine remained silent. Her name, often invoked as a symbol of balance, now floated in a vacuum. She offered no endorsement, no condemnation. And that silence became a message of its own. Some said she was being diplomatic, others whispered that she was waiting to see which direction the tide would turn. But Anne's response was less subtle. The Princess Royal, once visible beside Camilla at key events, began to distance herself. A scheduled joint appearance was abruptly cancelled. Private lunches went unreturned. And within the palace, the message became clear: Anne, too, was watching. Camilla had intended to erase Sophie's complaint beneath a storm of distraction. But in doing so, she underestimated the one weapon Sophie had always mastered: patience. While the Queen Consort moved in noise, Sophie waited in silence. And it was in that silence that her power grew. But Camilla miscalculated Sophie's quiet power, and the king was already reading every word. It wasn't a casual letter, it was a legal-style document, laced with formality, history, and heartbreak. Sophie had outlined every instance, 5 protocol violations in 6 months. Each line supported with footnotes, royal archives, and precedents dating back to Queen Victoria. For King Charles, it wasn't just a document, it was an ultimatum wrapped in velvet. Bound in navy blue cardstock and sealed with the crest of the Duke of Edinburgh's office, the document bore none of the hesitation that often characterizes internal palace grievances. Its opening paragraph didn't appeal to emotion but to duty, invoking not Sophie's personal offense, but the Crown's collective integrity. She laid out each breach in precise detail, referencing events, citing observers, and most damningly contrasting each one with documented precedent. Where Camilla had repositioned herself at state receptions, Sophie provided photographic timelines. Where guest lists had been altered, she included drafts and archived notes bearing Queen Elizabeth's annotations. The weight of history filled every paragraph not just as context, but as armor. But it wasn't merely clinical. Woven into the constitutionality of the document was a deep emotional undercurrent. Sophie's voice, though restrained, bled with reverence for the institution, for order, for the woman who mentored her through it all. She invoked moments from Elizabeth's reign when the same protocols had held firm under crisis. She reminded the king of their mother's insistence that hierarchy wasn't about vanity, it was about visibility, clarity, and stability. The document wasn't a personal vendetta. It was a preservation act disguised as protest. Buried deep within the final pages lay a quiet reference few would have recognized at first glance, a quote from the Queen's private speech to her family on the eve of her Platinum Jubilee. "We are not symbols of change, we are guardians of continuity." Sophie underscored those words, then followed with a single line in her own hand. "If the crown no longer honors protocol, what remains sacred?" It was not rhetorical, it was a dagger wrapped in silk. When the document landed on King Charles's desk that morning, he paused everything else. Reports say he spent over 2 hours reading and rereading it in silence, occasionally underlining passages in pencil. And next to that final devastating line, he scribbled just 6 words, "Must be addressed." This is not petty. For a man often accused of evading confrontation, it was a definitive admission. This wasn't about personalities, this was about preservation. Staffers say the room shifted that day. The tone inside the palace grew colder, more watchful. The veil of pageantry was still intact, but behind it something raw was beginning to form. Not outrage, resolve. The palace had been handed a mirror. It could choose to look away, or it could acknowledge what stared back. But either path would cost something. The palace had to act, but no one could predict who would be summoned first to the king's private study. For Charles, the throne never felt heavier. Torn between the woman he loved and the woman who never asked for power, he was forced to make a decision no monarch had faced in over 70 years. Would he stand by Camilla, or uphold the memory of his mother by acknowledging Sophie's bold call for justice? Retreating to Balmoral in a bid for clarity, Charles found no peace. The silence of the Highlands echoed louder than the court whispers he had tried to escape. Every room reminded him of his mother, her discipline, her unshakable commitment to the institution, and most of all, her wisdom. A single quote haunted him in the pages of her personal journal. "Listen to the quiet ones. They'll outlast the storms." He knew who she meant. Sophie had never sought glory or fought for headlines. She served. And in her silence, she preserved more than just protocol, she preserved the monarchy's soul. Yet Camilla was no longer an outsider. She was Queen Consort, a title earned through decades of survival and strategy. She had stood beside him through scandal and exile, through national mourning and fractured public opinion. And now, she was being accused not of treason, but of erosion, of peeling away at the traditions Elizabeth died defending. It wasn't a crime of rebellion, but one of arrogance, and that made it even more dangerous. Anne was the first to break the family silence. In a private conversation at Windsor, she told her brother what no aide dared to say. "The crown won't survive sentiment," she warned. "Not yours, not anyone's." She didn't name Camilla, she didn't need to. Her message was cold, clear, and surgical. Tradition wasn't about comfort, it was about continuity. And Sophie had chosen to defend it when no one else did. Then came William's silence. The heir apparent said nothing, but his absence from meetings involving Camilla was deafening. Some believed it was diplomacy, others sensed alignment. He had always admired Sophie's quiet discipline, and more importantly, he had absorbed the Queen's teachings as deeply as his aunt had. Still, he remained still, his neutrality preserving his future, while subtly signalling his stance. For Charles, it all led to one impossible moment. In his own hand, he drafted a statement meant to quell the storm. It acknowledged Sophie's concerns, reaffirmed his faith in Camilla, and wrapped the crisis in royal language. But before it reached his communications team, he stopped. He reread the final paragraph twice, then he tore the page in half and set it aside. The following morning, a message was sent discreetly. Sophie was to be summoned first, alone. No aides, no press, no courtiers, just the King and the Duchess of Edinburgh, face to face behind closed doors. It was a decision that signaled something deeper than a procedural response. It was a recognition of weight, of responsibility, of reckoning. And Charles knew, in the pit of his stomach, that whatever Sophie brought into that room would not be limited to protocol. He could feel it. And in that fateful meeting, the Duchess would reveal something even more damaging than protocol breaches, something personal. Sophie had held her silence on one detail. Until now, in the privacy of the King's study, she confessed that Camilla had privately overruled a royal invitation list, excluding several of Queen Elizabeth's closest allies in a subtle act of erasure. It was more than protocol now. It was personal. And the King's expression changed in an instant. The room grew heavier as Sophie began to speak not with accusation, but with unbearable restraint. She recounted a moment at Balmoral, mere weeks after the Queen's passing, when a gathering meant to honour Elizabeth's lifelong confidants had been quietly altered. Lady Susan Hussey, Lord Elton, and two of the Queen's most trusted ladies-in-waiting had been mysteriously uninvited at the last minute. When Sophie questioned it at the time, she was told the guest list had been streamlined. She hadn't pushed back then. But in the months that followed, she found proof that chilled her to the core. It was Camilla. Emails from private secretaries, whispered testimonies from aides, all confirming that the Queen Consort had intervened, arguing that the monarchy needed to turn a new page, one without what she reportedly called dusty relics of a past reign. For Charles, it was like a slap from history itself. These were not just guests. They were sacred links to his mother's reign, her chosen confidants, her emotional anchors. To learn that they had been pushed aside not out of necessity, but by design, broke something inside him. Sophie did not deliver this revelation with venom. She did it through tears. She described how, during the Queen's final days, she'd sat at her bedside and listened to stories of these very people, how Elizabeth had asked that they never be forgotten, how she had begged Charles to keep them close as a gesture of continuity. Sophie's voice cracked as she remembered those moments. She wasn't merely grieving the loss of a monarch, she was grieving the quiet dismantling of everything that monarch had stood for. Charles sat frozen. The weight of the crown no longer symbolic, it was a burden crushing his chest. Everything Sophie said matched what he had tried not to notice. A subtle change in court dynamics, a missing name here, an unexpected absence there. And now it was laid bare not just an error in protocol, but a deliberate redirection of royal memory, one that happened under his watch. When Sophie finished, she looked up not for forgiveness but for understanding. And Charles, voice low and trembling, said the words that would stay with her forever. She left it to me, and I failed her. The admission didn't feel like weakness. It felt like collapse. A man suddenly aware that in trying to protect the present, he had wounded the past. The silence between them was not empty. It was packed with history, legacy, and the ghosts of decisions never made. But the confrontation wasn't over, for Camilla had one final move and it would stun even her fiercest critics. Camilla knew the monarchy's real game wasn't protocol, it was perception. And if Sophie wanted war, Camilla would fight not with tradition, but with optics. Within days, Sophie found herself excluded from a high-profile charity event. Photographers were tipped, headlines shifted. The Queen Consort had entered the arena, and she was ready to redefine who held power behind the crown. What began as a whisper campaign turned swiftly into a full media offensive. Sophie's name, once associated with quiet elegance and loyalty, was now tangled in a series of suggestive headlines. At the top? Asked one. Is the Duchess cracking? Read another. Camilla's allies moved fast, feeding carefully chosen narratives to media insiders. Sophie, they claimed, was being too emotional, too attached to the old ways, out of step with the new rhythm of the modern monarchy. And while the stories didn't come directly from Clarence House, the fingerprints of influence were unmistakable. The removal of Sophie's name from the speaker's list at the Windsor Education Fund Gala was passed off as a scheduling error, but insiders knew the truth. It had been deliberate, calculated, silent punishment dressed as coincidence. On the very day Sophie was meant to lead that event, Camilla emerged unannounced at a children's hospital in Kent, cameras in tow, journalists in place. The optics were devastating. While one royal was being quietly erased, the other was painting herself as the heart of the new monarchy. The contrast couldn't have been clearer, and for many watching, it wasn't subtle. It was a message. This was Camilla's house now, and she was tightening her grip. But the move came with risk. Public opinion, once comfortably in her corner, began to fracture. Longtime royal observers noted the timing, the tone, the sudden shift in narratives. Social media exploded with comparisons. Videos of Sophie comforting Queen Elizabeth at past engagements resurfaced, fueling sympathy and speculation. The crowd wasn't blind, and though some swallowed the new script, many began to question who was really pulling the strings. Behind palace walls, Catherine finally broke her silence, but only in private. One word, spoken to a trusted aide after reading the latest headline, unnecessary. No elaboration, no position taken, but the word echoed. It revealed restraint, yes, but also quiet disapproval. And when Anne was seen arriving at Bagshot Park in an unmarked car, staying for 2 hours behind closed doors, it sparked something deeper than gossip. Speculation turned to movement. Alliances were being questioned. Lines were being drawn in places no one could see, yet everyone could feel. Camilla had played her move with the precision of a queen who had survived 1,000 battles. But this was no ordinary opponent. Sophie didn't fight in the press. She didn't campaign. She didn't retaliate with visibility. She simply endured. And that, in a world obsessed with control and performance, made her dangerous. Yet the battle would not be won in headlines or silence, but in what King Charles chose to do next. The statement was short, just 2 paragraphs, but its impact echoed across the monarchy. King Charles finally broke his silence, and while it didn't name names, every insider knew what it meant. Protocol would be re-evaluated, tradition respected, and no one, not even a queen consort, could override the order inherited from Elizabeth II. But would it be enough to heal the royal fracture? The palace press office released it just after noon, a single document, typed, dated, and sealed with the royal insignia. It bore no reference to Sophie, no allusion to Camilla, and yet every syllable struck like thunder behind gilded doors. In honouring the crown's past, the king wrote, "We fortify its future. Protocol is not merely form, it is our family's compass. It must evolve, but it cannot be ignored." The message was clear. The monarchy's traditions were not decorative. They were foundational. And from this moment forward, they would not be treated as optional. Within hours, reactions surged behind the scenes. Camilla was notably absent from the next royal briefing, a meeting she had attended routinely since her elevation to queen consort. There was no explanation given, no official comment issued, just a single empty seat, and the ripple of realization that her power, once expanding, had now been curbed. She hadn't been exiled, but she had been checked. And in the world of royalty, that distinction is everything. Meanwhile, Windsor stirred with quiet re-emergence. Sophie returned not in defiance, but in duty. No interviews, no declarations, just a presence that spoke volumes. She walked alongside Princess Anne and Catherine, not as a protester, but as a reminder of continuity, of strength, of restraint. Their appearance together at a private luncheon for military widows sent a new kind of message, one not printed in royal ink, but written in the unspoken language of alignment, and it didn't go unnoticed. Observers quickly pointed out that Catherine, too, was now being seated more prominently at public events closer to the king, her schedule increasingly echoing the rhythms once held by Queen Elizabeth herself. These weren't coincidences, they were signals, shifts beneath the surface, suggesting a quiet realignment of power and favour. Across the press, headlines began to change. The fury, the speculation, the palace intrigue, it hadn't disappeared, but it was receding into something more enduring. Reflection. Commentators began calling Sophie the Duchess, who rewrote the rules without ever raising her voice. Her complaint, once painted as disruptive, now read as prophetic. And through it all, she said nothing. That, perhaps, was her final triumph. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.